Today we're going to be installing the Fusion NLT water softener. NLT stands for Next Level Technology. This particular water softener is the most efficient water softener on the market. You will be receiving this in several boxes. Typically it's going to come UPS. Unless it's a larger system, then it'll come freight. But you want to make sure when you get the boxes you have everything you need. So we're going to go over that now. The first box that you'll get is the brine tank. Inside the brine tank is where we ship other parts. You'll have your control valve, that'll be in there. You'll have your brine line, which we'll use to hook the brine tank to the main water softening valve. And it will also ship with a funnel to put the media in when it's time. Once you've confirmed you have those three items, then we can pull the brine tank out, move the box to the side. The brine tank will have a safety grid inside, as well as the brine tube with the connectors on the side. The next thing you'll get will be your actual mineral tank. There'll be nothing else in this box except the mineral tank and the distributor tube. Remove the mineral tank from the box, move the box to the side, and then check your mineral tank to make sure there's no damage. Once we know the mineral tank is okay, then we can pull the top cover off, and there should be a distributor tube with a distributor basket in the tank when you get the tank. We can leave that in there for now, and we'll move this item to the side. The last item that you'll get will be resin, and on larger systems you may get gravel as well. The resin can come in either one box up to 3 boxes. If you have 2.5 cubes, you can have 2 full cubic feet of resin, and then a partial box that's a half cube. This resin will be shipped in boxes similar to this. It's actually pretty heavy. This is a 54-pound box. Half cube resin will be in a much smaller box, and this is basically just more of this resin. We just have to get 1.5 cubes instead of 2 full cubes. Once everything has been laid out, we've confirmed that we have everything, then we can move on to the installation. The first thing we want to do is choose a good location for the installation. Now, to choose the location that you want, you have to keep several things in mind. Typically, we want the water softener to be as close to the incoming water source as possible, but any outside irrigation or outside spigots should be plumbed in prior to the water softener. It's not a good idea to water plants and lawn with softened water. May not hurt you over the first year, but after a couple of years you'll start to get a lot of sodium buildup within your soil, and you'll have problems growing grass and things like that. So for outside spigots, that should always be raw, hard water that hasn't went through the softener. The other thing to keep in mind is we'll need an electrical source, and we can use an extension cord as long as it's at least a 12-gauge heavy-duty extension cord with a ground. We don't want to go much more than about 10 or 15 feet with an extension cord. And we want to make sure that we have it tied up off the ground and it's away from water sources where we're not going to get any kind of moisture or any kind of corrosion or a short. The other thing to keep in mind is we need some sort of a drain. This drain can be a standpipe from like a washer and dryer. We can run a drain line over to a laundry sink and use a laundry sink to drain the water. We can go overhead. The softener will drain with force, so we're going to have to secure the drain line, and we're also going to have to make sure it's in a place that's secure when we attach it to the drain system. Now, your local code will more than likely call for a air gap to be installed. This should be anywhere from 1 inch to 1.5 inches of air gap between the actual drain line and your home's drain line. This will provide an air break in case the drain line backs up. We don't have an opportunity to get drain water into the softening system. Now, you can also use a sump pump for a drain. If you do that, again, we need to have some sort of an air gap to prevent it from backing up, but that's an acceptable method as well. Today, we're going to be tapping into 1-inch pecks line. The Fusion NLT comes with 1-inch connectors. So if you don't have 1-inch line, you have 3/4, then we'll have to adapt it You can either adapt it right at the softener or you can adapt it at the plumbing. Today we're using 1-inch pecks, like I said, and we're going to be using 1-inch flex connectors, which we also sell, that will make your installation really easy. This, after today, you can get an idea of how simple this is going to be, because when it comes to plumbing, we're not going to do much more than cut a piece of pipe out and push some pipe together. We're not going to do any sweating, gluing, or anything with this particular type of pipe. So first and foremost, we're going to bring the tank over. And in this tank, there's a center distributor tube. This center distributor tube will fit in the bottom of the tank, and it'll fall into an indentation in the bottom of the tank. If your tube is sticking up above the tank like this, then you probably don't have it centered. When it's centered, it'll be flush with the top of the tank where you can't touch it, similar to this. Once we know we got this tube centered, then we're going to put some duct tape over the top of it so no resin or gravel in a larger system would go down into this distributor tube when we're filling it. Once you have it covered, you're going to install the funnel that we supply. Make sure the tube is in the center of the funnel and centered in the tank. And then for the filling process, this is where you may want to get a helper, someone to hold the funnel for you. And it's never a bad idea to use a dust mask and goggles just to prevent anything from coming back into your face, your nose, or your eyes. If you bought a Fusion NLT Hybrid system, this is the procedure you will follow to fill the tanks. The first thing that I would do is fill the carbon tank. And when you get your packages, you'll have packages of carbon as well as packages of softening resin. You may even have gravel with the carbon, depending on the size of the system that you get. If you have gravel, you're going to pour that into the tank first. Now, typically there's no gravel in the softening tank unless it's a really big system. So if you're kind of confused of whether you should put gravel in the softening tank or not, you can give us a call. So again, you want to use a dust mask, safety goggles, and it's not a bad idea to have somebody with a vacuum close just sucking out the dust as it comes off. You'll have a helper maybe holding the vacuum and holding the funnel as you pour the media in. But you're going to pour the gravel in first, and it should basically be above the distributor, the actual distributor cone on the bottom of the tank. And then from there, you're going to pour all the carbon that you received into the tank. Once you're done filling that up, then you can remove the funnel and then remove the duct tape. It's never a bad idea to fill the carbon tank with water and let it soak. Carbon has a tendency to trap a lot of air in it, and not only that, but there's a lot of carbon fines in there and dust that will have to be rinsed out. If you soak this carbon for an hour or two before you install it, it's going to really decrease the amount of rinse time and make it a little bit easier to start the system up. So once you've had, you've filled the carbon up with a tank, you filled it with water, and you can let it sit. Then you can move the funnel over to your resin tank. And again, if you have gravel, it'll go in first. Then you'll pour all the resin, the softening resin that was sent with the system, into the softening tank. Again, once that's done, you can remove the funnel and remove the duct tape. Once both tanks are filled with media, you have the tape off the distributor tube, then we can start to put in the interconnect kit. So the first thing you want to do is you want to pull everything out of the box and lay it out, and that's what we're going to do now. Once you have your parts laid out, you can make sure that you have everything that's in the picture. You can see here that these are the parts that will come with the system. It'll also ship with a tool to put the system or the interconnect together. Now, when it ships, this particular part, which is the valve adapter, is going to be put together, and I always take this apart because it's going to be easier to install everything with these pieces separated. And you kind of got to get your fingernails in there and pull it apart. And you'll see there's an O-ring on here with this white retaining clip. That's what seals this. But if you separate these parts out this way, it'll make it a little easier on you. And we're going to pull these fittings out later, but we don't need to do it now. Right now we can go ahead and move forward and get the tanks, the adapters on the tanks, and then I'll show you how to do the interconnects easily. Once we know, we have the carbon tank as our primary tank, we have our primary tank adapter. Take your grease, Put a little bit on the inside distributor O-ring. Put a little bit around the tank sealing O-ring. Once you have the grease on there, take your upper basket and it'll push in and turn and lock. Once that's done, then we can install it on the tank. You're gonna, again, install the primary adapter on the carbon tank. Put the distributor hole over the distributor tube. Slide it down into place. Then we're gonna turn this clockwise, making sure we don't cross thread it. It should spin right in if it's properly put in there. Spin it all the way down till it's hand tight. And then I usually use my feet, hold the bottom of the tank, give it a couple more little wraps and turns until it's nice and snug. Now the O-ring does the work here, so you don't have to have this really, really tight. And you don't want to use tools on this because it'll break. You know, if you use tools on any of these surfaces, snap something off here, it'll crack it, and then you'll have problems later down the road. So once the primary tank adapter is on there, then we can move to the secondary tank, which is the softening tank. There we're going to prepare the secondary tank adapter. Same way. We're going to use the grease. We're going to lube the inside distributor O-ring. Then lube up the tank sealing O-ring. Install the upper basket. Again, it pushes in and locks in. Now we can install this on the secondary tank, which is the softening tank. You're going to put the distributor basket over the distributor tube. Push it down until it's flush with the tank. Sometimes you got to work it around to get the O-ring over the distributor tube like I had to do. Then turn it clockwise all the way down until it's snug. Then again, like I said, I hold the bottom of the tank and give it a couple more turns until it's snug. Then you can kind of face the tanks together. And I turn these jackets so the seams are in the back. And that's the other thing to remember too, is these jackets, they come with a protective coating that you can peel off. When you peel it off, it'll make it real bright and shiny. I never do it until the system's completely installed. And actually mine, I never have taken it off. I just leave it on there for protection. But if you want it to look really nice and shiny, you can pull that off and it's bright. It looks like bright chrome. So now we're ready to put these tubes in and put the tanks together. Obviously, like I said, the shorter one's on the bottom and the longer one's on top just because of the offset of these fittings. Now what I like to do is spin this on. Spin this one on. And then I remove these two top fittings. This will allow you to be able to get to these bottom fittings and tighten them up properly. Take our two pairs of channel locks, one holding the fitting, and then one to tighten the connector down. The good thing about these is there's rubber O-ring seals in these connectors, so you don't have to have these really, really tight. You don't have to put thread tape or anything like that on there, but you want them snug to where they stop and seal. If they leak, you can tighten them up later, but it's better to get them, you know, nice and snug now, then you don't have to mess with it later. You're going to do the same thing on this side. Hold the fitting. Tighten the tube down. Reinstall the top straight connector back in the primary tank adapter. Put the clip back in. Take your larger tube and screw it on here, but just run it up snug so that way we can line up the elbow fitting first. Then we take the elbow fitting don't put it in the secondary adapter. Screw it on this tube first. Line it up, then push it down into the adapter. Makes it a lot easier when you try to tighten it up if you follow those steps. Then you put the clip in, and that holds the elbow in. Now, we can go back, snug the tubes. This one you want to be careful that you don't tighten it so much and put so much stress on it that you break the elbow. So that's why I always put this other wrench on here, just so I got some type of leverage on this elbow and I'm not putting all the stress on the clip and on the O-ring. So the next step is to pull out the control valve, and we're going to put the adapter on this so it'll fit onto the primary tank adapter. The adapter for this is the sleeve and the adapter plate. Spin that down into place, and this is where the tool really comes into play. This tool, there's little notches in here, and this tool will fit right in those notches. And this is really the main reason the tool's in here. You can see that you can kind of do this with your hand, but as far as putting this piece on, this tool is critical. It makes it a lot easier, and you know it's nice and tight because you got a tool that, you know, the spanner wrench that's actually fitting in there, and you know it's tight. So once you get it in there, then you're going to snug that up. And once it's snug, that's all the farther you have to go, because there's an O-ring that seals this, and it's going to do the work. So once we have that on there, we can sit the valve down. Now we're going to install the intermediate adapter. We're going to lubricate the inside distributor O-ring, and then we're going to lubricate the tank sealing O-ring. And again, this is another chance that another time that we're going to need this wrench. So now we screw that onto the primary tank adapter and screw it down until it's flush and hand tight. And once it's hand tight, then we can use this tool this way, drop it in there, and it locks into place. Put the tool on top. Go ahead and snug it another 1/8 turn or so, not too tight that you break it. Now that's nice and tight on there. We don't have to worry about that coming loose. Now we're done with the wrench. We can put it aside. Then the final thing to do is put the valve onto the primary valve adapter. Again, we're going to lube this center O-ring. And then it's difficult to lube this O-ring once this is in place. So I usually just put a little bit of lubricant around the inside of this lip, which is where that O-ring seals. Just get a nice little thin coat of grease around here, and that'll help with that outer O-ring. Then we're going to set the valve down onto the primary valve adapter. You'll feel the O-ring kind of slide down on there. Then you can take the collar and start to tighten it down clockwise. Kind of push on the valve as you tighten it down, make sure it's seated all the way on there. And then once it's all the way down, make sure it's straight. And then you just tighten this by hand. No need for tools, no need to tighten it any tighter than that. It's going to seal just fine with the O-rings. Now, once we've completed this, we've prepared the tanks, we're ready to actually install the plumbing and bring the system online. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in the installation fittings. We're using 1-inch pipe here today. We're going to use the 1-inch fittings. Get a little bit of grease. On the O-rings on both. Grease those up. Install them into the back of the valve. Now if your red clips are in there, you got to remove the clips first. I've already removed these. But once you have those in place, now we need to put the red clips back in. And those are done. Today we're going to use the 1-inch flex hoses that we sell on our site. This comes as a kit. These have O-rings in the end, so we don't need to do any kind of thread tape or anything here. We can just screw these right to the valve. Make sure it's hand tight. Take your 2 wrenches and hold the fitting. Tighten the tube. Again, this doesn't have to be super tight, because that seal's going to do the work. Just get it nice and snug, maybe another 1/8 turn, and that's about it. And do the same thing for the other side. Run it down snug. Hold the fitting. Turn the tube. Snug it up. Now, I've already cut the pipe, and we installed some fittings here to make this installation go a little simpler. On the valve itself, again, you have arrows that show the direction of flow. The arrow that points towards the valve is the inlet. The arrow pointing away from the valve is the outlet. So, on this application, the inlet's right here on this side. This is our inlet plumbing. So we're going to install the flex tube accordingly. Now, these flex tubes come with quick connect fittings that you just push right down onto the tubing. This is 1-inch this is 1-inch pecks, but it'll work on 1-inch CTS copper as well. So once you have the inlet pipe installed, we can install the outlet plumbing. Same way, push it down the tube, tilt the seats all the way down, and you shouldn't be able to pull it back off. And then I just straighten my tubes up to make sure there's no stress on any of the connections. Once we have the tubing connected, we want to make sure there's no leaks. So we're going to put the valve into bypass mode, which you're going to turn the valves counterclockwise using your supplied plastic Allen wrench, and the valve should be in line when it's in bypass. Once it's in bypass, then we can go ahead and turn the water on and check for leaks, and that'll check for any of our plumbing leaks, any of our leaks here, all the way up to this bypass valve. If we have any leaks now, we want to fix them. We don't want to wait till later. We'll go ahead and fix them now before we move forward. I'm going to slowly turn the water on with it in the bypass position. Then we go over to a sink and open the faucet. Once you've run this and the air's out of it, shut the valve off, turn it down. Once we know we don't have any leaks, then we can go on to putting in the drain line. This is a 5/8 OD and a 1/2 inch ID. We want to have a hose clamp to secure that to the drain barb. And then we're going to push this onto the drain. You want to make sure you push this all the way on there. Once you have that installed on there, then we're going to tighten the clamp down. Now the drain line's connected to the softening valve, and you can move on to connecting the drain to your actual drain of your home. Now we're going to connect the brine line to the valve, and when you get the valve, there'll be a stiffener tube stiffener that's wire tied to this brine nut. Go ahead and take that loose, pull the red tie out of it, remove the nut. The nut already has the sealing collar as part of the nut. Take your supplied brine line, push the nut over top of it, push the tube stiffener down into the line, push the line all the way in until it stops, and then tighten down the brine nut. You're going to tighten this as tight as you can get it by hand. Then use your pliers or channel locks and go ahead and tighten this at least another half turn to full turn. You want to make sure this line's really tight because 99% of the problems that happen with a softener is due to this line getting loose. So make sure this is nice and tight. And it's never a bad idea to go back periodically and check these connections. Once we made the connection to the brine elbow on the valve, now we're going to make the connection to the brine elbow on the brine tank. Now once you have the brine tank over in place, we're going to take the cap off the brine tube, remove the note sticker here. This is just telling us about the tube stiffener, which is in the end of this fitting. So when you screw this off there, be really careful because there'll be a tube stiffener in the end. Once you have those two items off, then we're going to take the other end of the brine line, feed it through the hole in the side of the tank, take your nut, push it down over the tube, take your tube stiffener, push it in the end of the tube. Push the tube into the elbow until it stops, slide the nut down, turn it clockwise and tighten it until it's hand tight, as tight as you can get it. Then again, take your channel locks, tighten it additional half to full turn. Make sure it's tight. Once that connection's made, then we can put the cap back on the brine well. Once you have the brine tank installed and connected, the first thing you want to do is take 5 gallons of water in a 5-gallon bucket, pour it in the bottom of the brine tank. That'll offset the grid in the bottom, so we make sure we have enough water in there for a good salt solution on the first regeneration. Now when we go through the startup process, part of going through it, it's going to go through a refill and it's going to put some more water in the tank for the salt solution. But we want to make sure we get enough in there to get us above that salt grid. So once you've poured that 5 gallons in there, then you can put 2 to 4 bags or as much as you want salt in the salt tank. When you fill the salt tank, you always want to make sure that when you're done putting the salt in, you should be about 1 inch below the top of this cap. You don't want to fill it over this cap because then if we have to get in here, we can't get in there. So I always go to about 1 inch below the top of the cap, and that will be my full mark. Now as you use the salt, you want to use it until it's all the way down to the water level and then refill it. You don't want to put a new bag on every week because you'll end up with a big chunk of salt that won't dissolve. Now we're going to move on to startup. We're going to plug in our transformer, plug it into a continuous 110 outlet. Now depending on the valve status, you may need to unlock it. And you'll know if you ever go up and push a button and you see it show up on the screen that says 3 seconds, or hold the settings button for 3 seconds to unlock, then that's what you'll have to do. You hold the setting buttons for 3 seconds, you'll hear a little beep, you let it go, and then you can start to use the actual buttons. We're going to start a manual regeneration, and we do that by pushing and holding the manual button. And you'll hold it, you'll see the screen will change and it'll say regen immediately. After it says that, then it'll immediately change to advancing to brine. We're going to let the valve move all the way to the brine position until it actually shows a time value and starts to count down. Once we see that time value counting down, then we're going to advance the valve to the next cycle, which is backwash, because that's where we want to actually introduce water to the tank. So now I have time counting down. I'm going to push and release that again, and it'll say advancing to backwash. We're going to wait until it actually makes it to the backwash and we get a time value that's counting down. Now that we have a time value that's counting down in backwash, we're going to slowly introduce water to the tanks. So we're going to slowly open this valve and let the water in. We're just going to crack it open about 1/8 of a turn. Now once you see water coming out of the drain, it's going to be discolored. It's probably going to have a black tint to it. It's going to look like tinted glass. That's just the carbon fines washing out of the carbon. So you're going to watch this line. You're going to see air and water coming through here, and you're going to watch it until it runs clear and you don't see any air in there. But to do that, over this period of time, you're going to slowly open the valve a little bit more until you have the valve fully open. Now, if you open it too far, you'll know, because you'll get a lot of noise and knocking, and you know that you're putting the water in there too fast. And if that's the case, just simply back it back off a little bit. But you're going to kind of open this up slowly over the backwash period until it's completely open. Once that backwash cycle is done, the valve's going to automatically advance to the next cycle, which is the rinse cycle. You're just going to wait, and it takes quite a while for this valve to move from backwash to rinse. Once the valve reaches the rinse cycle, you'll see a time value counting down. Again, we can go over and watch the drain line, make sure it's running clear and there's no air coming out. And we're just going to continue to let this rinse. This is just going to give us that much more time to flush everything out. And depending on the size of your system, you may still be getting dirty water during the rinse cycle. So let it run for the entire rinse. It's going to run about 5 minutes or so. Once the rinse cycle is done, you'll see it says advancing to refill. What this cycle is it's going to put water back into the salt tank to make a salt solution for the next regeneration. You don't want to touch the valve anymore at this point. You want to let it run through this entire refill cycle. That's what's going to allow the tank to have the proper amount of water in it. Once the refill's done, you'll see it say advancing to service. The valve will move around back to the service position. You'll see a date and the time of day on there. Now we know we're back in the service mode. Once that's done, we can finish bringing the system online. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to that same spigot that you went to earlier, or the faucet or whatever you used, and we're going to open that up. Once you have it open, then now we can go back to the softener and finish bringing it online. Once we have the faucet open, or your spigot, then now it's time to open up the outlet valve on the bypass. And again, we want to do this slow. We're going to turn it clockwise using this Allen wrench. We're going to crack it open slowly because we don't want any big time air coming through and shaking all the plumbing. So once you open it up, open it slowly. Once you don't have any air coming out of the faucet and it's kind of running clear, then we can open this all the way up. Once you're ready to program, the only settings that we're going to have to change is in the settings menu. So we're going to push and hold the settings button. You're going to hold it for about 3 to 5 seconds. You'll hear a little beep and it'll say time of day. You'll see a black cursor. Wherever this black cursor is, that's the value that you're changing. So now we're going to set this to the actual time of day. Right now it's 12:30 p.m. here. So we're going to take the up arrow and change this value to 12. Push the settings button, that'll save that parameter, and move over to the minutes. It's actually 12:28 here. So we'll go up to 28, push the settings button, and it'll go over to the PM or the AM time cycle. This is really, really important. You want to make sure that this is correct. So here, like I said, it's 12:30 noon, so that's going to be PM. We're going to leave it on PM. If this was in the morning, we would change that to AM. Once you have that in the proper place, push and release the settings button, and that'll take it to the year. We're going to set that to this current year, which is 2014. So we're going to use the up arrow, bring that to 2014, push the settings button and release it, and that saves the value. Now we're going to do the month. It's on June, but this is January, so we're going to pull this down to January. Once it's there, we're going to push the settings button and release it. Then it's going to give us the date. Today is the 16th, so we're going to put that up to the 16th. Push the settings button, save the value. Then it moves to the hardness. The hardness level is dictated by whatever your feed water hardness is. So if your feed water hardness is 20, then we usually add about a 5 grain per gallon cushion to that, just to allow for fluctuations or possibly over usage at some point. So let's say your your hardness value of your feed water is 20, then we would set this to 25. You'll see that the cursor's over the actual value. You can use the up arrow. I'm going to use it and change it to 25. Once that's set, we're going to push the settings button and release it. Move to the next setting, which is the number of people in your home. This is going to be actual to the number of people of your home. So if you have 3 people in the home, you'll set this number to 3. Right now it's going to be coming from the factory set on 4, so make sure you change this to whatever amount of people are in your home. The reason this is so important is because we use the number of people and calculate that times a reserve capacity, and that gives us a total reserve capacity. So if you have this at 4 and you only have 1 person or 2 people in the home, then you're going to regenerate too often. So it's important to have this accurate. Again, we're going to assume we have 3 people. We're going to change this to 3, hit the settings button, release it, and that takes us to the next setting. This is the salt setting. If you're on municipal water, we're going to change this to high efficiency. If you're on moderately bad well water, then we can go to standard. If you're on well water that's really bad, then we want to go to iron manganese setting. We're going to set this for basically city water, so we're going to put this to high efficiency. Once that's done, we're going to push and release the settings button, and then it's going to say water source. If we were on a well, then we would leave this on well other. Like I said, we're going to assume this one's on city source, which is what the water supply is here. So we're going to change that to municipal. Once that's set to municipal or wherever your desired value, then you're going to push the settings button and release it, and then it's going to give you the regeneration time. Now this is why setting the time of day is so crucial, because if your time of day is off, then this regeneration time could be off. If we had it on the AM time cycle, on our time of day, and we have this set to AM, then the thing's going to regenerate in the middle of the day, which is not what you want, because then you're going to be bypassing dirty water. So again, make sure this time is correct as well. You always want the regeneration to start about 2 hours after you go to bed. So if you work nights, that may be a daytime setting. If you work, regular days, then typically that's a nighttime setting. They come from the factory default at 2 a.m. and usually that works for just about everybody. So unless you need to change this value, we're going to leave it at 2 a.m. and move to the next parameter. We do that by pushing the settings button and releasing it, and then it'll say programming complete. That means we're done. You just leave the valve alone. It'll come back to the time of day you punched in as well as the date. The system's ready to go. Now all we need to do is make sure we have enough salt in the salt tank. And if you haven't already done it, pour 5 gallons of water in the salt tank just to fill up and displace the grid on the bottom of the salt tank. It's important to keep salt in the salt tank. If you run out of salt when you refill the tank, then you should manually regenerate the water softener a couple times in a row. Either 2 times back to back or 2 nights in a row. When you go to buy the softener, you'll see these items that I've mentioned in this video off to the side. The drain line, the installation kits, sediment filter packages, and we actually sell a resin care kit that'll help keep the resin clean. That's all on the page, and you can buy that from there. Again, this is the Fusion NLT water softener. This has been the installation manual. If you have any additional questions, please give us a call. If you're installing this on a well water application, it's not a bad idea to give us a call just to make sure that we have the settings in there properly for your particular application. 9 times out of 10, most of these are going to go into a city water application or a fairly standard application, and the settings will be fine. But if you have any questions or concerns about your settings, just give us a call at 1-800-608-8792. Thanks.